Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Rent Prep for Landlords. This is part of our interview series. I'm Andrew Schultz, community manager here at RentPrep. I'm also a real estate broker in the state of New York with over 14 years of experience in the investment property and property management industries. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. I'm super excited to have him on the show today. Vitaly Volpov is a real estate investor. He's a real estate broker. He's also a real estate attorney. And he's worn so many hats over the course of the years that it's just great to have him on the show. Vitaliy, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you do me a favor? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much for having me on, Andrew. I'm really excited to be here as well. This has been a long time coming. I know we've been talking about this for a while, and I'm glad to be here on the RentPrep podcast. And yeah, as you said, I am a real estate investor, first and foremost, primarily. I currently own 124 rental units in upstate New York, near the capital of New York in Albany. I am also a part owner of a real estate brokerage where we specialize in representing investor clients, and we currently have over 30 real estate agents on our team. And we also run a property management company just as you do. We do it in our local area in and around Albany, New York. So we've got our hands on a lot of different things. And as you mentioned, I am a licensed attorney in New York. I am no longer practicing full time. I would say, very part-time at this point, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of why that happened and where my career took me. So.
Yeah, as I started out there, man of many hats. I mean, you said it all: property management, real estate, from the investment side, from the brokerage side, from the law side. There's a lot of different aspects of the real estate world that you've been involved in and that you can touch on here today. So, where did you start off? What was kind of the catalyst that got the whole ball rolling?
Yeah, I'm loath to take it too far back, but I think it's relevant to the whole discussion. So I'm a first generation immigrant. I came to this country with my parents when I was 12. It was just, we sold everything we had. My parents didn't have a ton of money. We basically came to this country, started from the bottom. We didn't speak any English. The jobs and careers that my parents had didn't translate here. So really literally had to start from the bottom in America. And so for us, if your viewers and listeners know anything about the immigrant communities, those people that come here are typically very motivated to build a new life for themselves because they're leaving something that was probably some kind of a hardship where they came from. This was the case for us as well. We weren't very wealthy there, and we certainly weren't wealthy here at all. Had to start with just basics. Like my parents had to, my dad, once he got his driver's license, once he learned enough English to actually do something here as a job, he bought a beat up Honda and started delivering pizzas in one of the local towns here where we live. And that was his sort of introduction to America. And on the flip side, for my mom, she couldn't get a regular job for a long time. So she was just cleaning houses and doing things like that. And for me, just watching them going through what they went through to bring me here and to give me the opportunities that this country provides to all of us, that was very inspiring. And so that kind of was the catalyst for me wanting to do something more and something better with myself and with my life and career. And so long story short, I meandered through and ended up getting into, I did well in college. I learned English. I did well in college. I went to law school, graduated the local law school here in Albany, New York, and started working as an attorney. With that said, I don't know if your viewers or listeners know much about what it takes, what's involved with being an attorney. I'm sure most people are probably, all they know about it is their small interactions with maybe someone did a real estate closing for them, or there was a divorce or something along those lines. And then the rest of it is just, TV, what you see in shows and movies. And you think that
Right.
glorified profession where you're making a ton of money, it's all high powered boardroom type of stuff. And the reality of it really isn't that at all. Most of what's involved with being an attorney is very mundane, and it is a lot of work. It's a ton of hours that you're putting in. You're usually sitting at a desk 90% of the time. You're not even in the courtroom because you're preparing briefs, preparing documents, you're doing research, all of that stuff. So I was doing that coming out of law school in 2010. I basically went straight to, as soon as I graduated, probably a few months, I had a break over the summer, took the bar, passed the bar, and started working as a lawyer. And
Mm-hmm.
I was putting in, 50, 60 hours a week on the regular. And in terms of work-life balance, it's really not something it's a necessarily a healthy work-life balance for somebody long term. And so pretty quickly I knew that I wanted to do something else and, invest the money that I was making. And I wasn't making even that much at the time relative to the student loans that I had. I came out of law school with like 130,000 in student loans, and, relative to what other professions were making. So, when people talk about like comparing doctors and lawyers, I will tell you,
Mm-hmm.
doctors make a lot more money than lawyers on average. So,
Mm-hmm.
average doctor probably makes 3 times what an average lawyer makes in the small market. If you're in New York City, or if you're in Chicago, you're in LA, in these types of markets, and you're an attorney there, sure, maybe you're making a lot more money, but that wasn't the case for me. And what really, got me started and going on this path is that I didn't want to continue putting in the hours and kind of feeling like I'm spinning my wheels. And so in 2011, about a year after I started as an attorney, I started looking for an investment property, a rental property where I could move into it, house hack it, and have a tenant on the other side, but also kind of offset my living expenses and possibly check that out and see, does it make sense for me? Is landlording and being a real estate investor, is that something that I would even succeed at? And
Mm-hmm.
it actually, it ended up working out pretty well, I'll say.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that your first deal was a house hack. Was it like a traditional house hack where it's a single family and you're renting out 3 other bedrooms and living in one, or was it a like a duplex where you were living in one side and renting the other?
Yeah, so it was a duplex, and
Mm-hmm.
I was specifically looking for a multifamily because
Mm-hmm.
you're right that a traditional house hack would be renting out rooms inside of a single family home. To me, that was never that appealing. I was in a relationship already at the time with my girlfriend at the time, was now my wife. We wanted privacy. That's one of the biggest things with regard to house hacking. You want to have your own space. And to me, I always felt like it made more sense to have a multi-unit property, to own a multi-unit property and live in one of those units and rent out the other ones when it came to house hacking, versus having roommates or having, Airbnb, strangers coming in at various points of your ownership. So
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense to you, like I just thought that that would be a better way to go. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever I talk to new investors, I think it really depends on where you are in life. And if you have a family, or if you have a girlfriend, or if you have, a spouse, it probably makes sense to not have to share personal space, kitchens, living rooms with others, and have your own space. Versus
Mm-hmm.
if you're in college or just out of college, and you have a bunch of roommates and friends and they want to chip in, or they'll pay you rent and they'll live in your house with you. Well, that's a different story. So I think it really depends on who you are and what stage of life you're in.
Well, and I think that the way that you did it with was it a duplex or a triplex?
Two family, yes, side by
Two
side
family.
duplex. Yeah.
That's honestly one of the biggest recommendations that I have for first-time home buyers when they're getting ready to buy a home is buy a duplex, live in one unit, rent the other unit out so it pays most, if not all, of your mortgage and then some. Because at the end of the day, it's taking an expense off of your plate while still helping you build equity, while still helping you get established, have your own place, things of that nature. And it's so easy to buy a multifamily, a 2 to 4 unit multifamily here in the Western New York region, at least, that it's almost a no-brainer for anybody looking to get into real estate investing at any level. So it's interesting that you went with a duplex versus the more traditional. What we hear whenever you hear house hack, it's always oh, I live in one bedroom and I have 17 people living in the other
Yeah.
bedrooms around me. So obviously the house hack was your first deal, if you will. When did you realize that it was time to leave the law firm? When did you realize that it was time to kind of move away from practicing law full time? We had a conversation offline where you were telling me about like the number of billable hours and things of that
Yeah.
nature. When did you realize that it was time to say, all right, enough is enough of this? I don't need to practice law on a day by day basis because I've reached a point now where I'm able to move forward without that.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a journey. So it wasn't an overnight thing for sure. And I think there are two inflection points for me that, if I look back and reflect on it, that I can talk about, that I can tell you about. So I'll tell you a quick story. So my second year as an associate at this law firm. So I graduated top of my class. I did really well in law school. I ended up going to a fairly large firm for our local area size-wise. So we have, I think, 70 plus attorneys, another 100 staff. So it's a pretty decent sized firm. So it's not anything small. It's also not anything huge. Like, again, big markets, New York City, you got Skadden Arps, or you have, some of these other large firms where you have thousands of attorneys. So it wasn't anything like that. But the structure of how you get paid at a law firm like mine and the private law firm typically is you get some amount of salary. So you have a set salary, you have a set number of hours that you have to quote unquote bill every single year. And then in addition to that, if you go over and above, or you do something exceptional, or maybe you bring in some additional business, you can actually make more money as a bonus. And bonus is given at the end of the year. Bonuses are typically discretionary. So regardless of what you do, it's up to the firm to decide. They evaluate it holistically and then decide, do we want to give a bonus and how much and to who, that type of thing. So probably my second year at the law firm, I was doing really well. I like I said, I had pretty good credentials and I was busting my butt, right? And the firm has a formula, which is kind of like a loose formula. If you go over the minimum threshold of hours by X number of hours, you get equivalent amount of bonus, right? And the more you go over, the more bonus you, in theory, would get. And then there's another formula for if I brought my own business, if I had my own clients that paid the firm to represent them, I would get a small cut of that as part of my bonus, right? And so I think I worked like, I don't know, literally 60 hours every single week, didn't take a vacation, just workaholic, just to see how much can I actually make. The salary was one thing, like what can I do with the bonus? And at the end of it all, I had this formula. We're coming up on December when bonus, conversations occur and the decisions are made. And I had a factor that it's going to be somewhere around like 25,000 based on the number of hours that I built. I brought in a little bit of business over here. I did the formula. I calculated. I was all excited.
And nothing to sneeze at.
No, I mean, it's not anything crazy, but at the same time, when you're second year out of law school, your third year out of law school, it's pretty significant, especially with the student
especially
loans
with 125 student loans. Exactly.
And so, here I am going into the meeting. I'm all excited. We come to the meeting. The partner is awesome. Like, the partners are all great. We're, good friends still. Nothing bad to say about them, but we sit down and we start going over the numbers. You had a good year. You build this much, did this. Okay, here's the bonus that we're going to give you. And she basically gives me a letter or a check or whatever it was. And I look at it and it's like $7,000 or $8,000 less than what my calculations were showing. Right. And, and she kind of understands that, like, it's less than what I was expecting. And then the answer for essentially unspoken question of why is it lower is that, well, it is discretionary, number one. Number two, they look at the whole profitability of the firm. Number three, they also want to kind of spread the love a little bit. So even some of the associates that maybe didn't do as well as me, didn't have as many billable hours, maybe didn't bring as much business, they should still get something too, because they want to keep people happy, right? And that, I should be happy with it, which I was, because it's discretionary. Again, bonuses are not mandatory. You're not entitled to a bonus if it's written as a discretionary bonus. And so the thing that I realized right then and there is that I am not in control of how much money I actually make in this job, because it's a job, because I'm working for someone else. I am not working for myself. My income is not directly tied to my results. My income is based on what my salary is and what the firm deems my results are in relative to everything else that the firm is looking at. And so at that point, and I was already investing in real estate by then, I think I might have had the duplex, and I think I bought a 2-family and a single family, which we can talk about if you want. But so I had a little bit of real estate already going on the side. But that's when I knew and I realized, okay, no matter how hard I work, there's always going to be some other decision maker as to how much I'm actually going to make and what the value is of my production. And at that point, I knew that I needed to redouble my efforts and focus on other ways that I can earn an income, reach financial independence, and it's not going to be tied to a job. And to bring it back for your listeners and everybody listening, so like, regardless what job you're in, if you're working for someone else, you have a cap on what your financial income and earnings are going to be or can possibly be. And it's very difficult to reach financial independence solely through a job. And traditional thinking is you stay in a job 35, 45 years, and then you retire at 65, and that's when you have your pension or your 401k, and that's what pays for your retirement. But I didn't
Right.
want to wait 35, 45 years to get to that point, and I didn't want to be beholden or relying on someone else, even if they're awesome people and it's a great high paying job like a corporate law firm. I just didn't want that. And at that point, that was the first inflection point where
Hmm.
I said, I'm going to go ahead, redouble my efforts, and I'm going to pursue this other thing while still meeting my regular obligations at the firm.
Hmm.
So that was
So
probably around.
essentially, it was the dollars for hours thing that was you kind of realized that at the end of the day, I'm only going to get to a certain level here no matter what, and that was kind of the first straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
Mhm.
But it sounds like there was something else on the back end as well.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, because, well, at the time, anyone who's investing in real estate knows you're not going to retire with 5 rental units, especially if you just started. So in the beginning of you buying, you maybe put down a small down payment. You're living in one of the buildings, one of the units, and then at the time I had a 2-family and a single family that I was also renting out as my rental properties. And so I have 4 income producing units. They're not going to replace my law firm salary, you know, anytime
Right,
soon,
right.
right? So I knew that in order to get to that point, I needed to do more. I needed to do something additional to that and continue growing. And, and that's what the path that I started at that point. And as time went on, as time passed, so this was probably 2013, 2014 when this happened, the story that I told you about with this bonus. And then I wasn't able to actually retire or quote unquote retire or leave my law firm and replace my income at the law firm through real estate until just around the pandemic time. So
Hmm.
2020 is when the pandemic hit. And that was the second inflection point. So we'll talk about how I got to scaling and all of that in just a little bit. But I think since you're asking me about what I was thinking, like when did this inflection point happen? When did I make the decision? It was during the pandemic when, in March of 2020, we had panic.
Hmm.
Everything got shut down. Governors all across the country shut down businesses. No one was going to work. Everyone was sort of on a holding pattern. My law firm was no different. It was the same thing. The clients kind of clammed up. They stopped. They don't know. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know if they're going to continue with their businesses. So the businesses that the firm was representing couldn't pay the firm, so the firm paused. And so everyone
Hmm.
was remote. No one was in the office, and the amount of work that everybody had at the law firm really dried up and also changed in sort of uh, focus and tone to a government helping businesses navigate with the different government assistance programs and the bans and the shutdowns and getting sick with COVID and employees getting sick, those types of things. That's what the focus was at the firm in terms of legal practice. And
Hmm.
during that entire time, from March to I think probably like August, September of 2020, I was remote and not in the office. And during this entire time, we had a little bit of a pause, as I'm sure you can attest to in real estate, as like brokerage and real estate sales agents, and then real estate investing. But then everything went right back to, okay, well, people still want to invest, they still want to buy real estate, and that
Yeah, yeah.
continued while the law firm was kind of on pause for me. And so I was doing much less work, billable hours, much less work for the actual firm during that time, but real estate was booming for us, my business and my business partner's business. And so I basically got spoiled almost during that time where things are going great in real estate and I'm not having to do much at my law firm. And then the law firm said, okay, they've lifted some restrictions, like the governors lifted the restrictions. We're going to come back to the office part-time. So they are expecting associates like myself to come back and work 2 to 3 days a week in the office. And I came back, and I think it was like the first day I came back, I sat back at my desk. I wiped off the dust off of it, off the computer
Off of everything. Yeah.
the keyboard and everything. And I sat there and it was just like, I really don't want to be here. And it wasn't just that I didn't want to be there. It was, I knew that my time and my sort of investment and value and what I could bring to my own business on the side, on the outside of the firm, outside of
Hmm.
the office that I was occupying, was so much bigger and greater. And there are deals we were putting together where I might have spent maybe an hour or 2 hours total time working on them, and making $10,000, $20,000 as a fee, whether it's, an assignment of contract, but it's a wholesale deal or something else, or we bought and sold something quickly, like a flip. And it was nowhere near commensurate with what I'm doing here at the firm. And so I sat there, and I basically, the first few days, I just kept coming into the office, and I felt this weight on my shoulders, and I couldn't figure out why I had this weight on my shoulder. Like I just felt like depressed, almost like heavy, heavy, heavy. And I talked to my wife, and I'm like, I think I just don't want to be there anymore. And I think it's time. And my real estate investments and business was producing well enough to definitely equal what I was making at the firm. And at that point, it was probably already exceeding it significantly. And at that point, I didn't even have, I think maybe I was at 50, 60 units at the time. And I basically was just, I went to one of the partners and I told them, hey, I'm going to quit. And it was a complete shock, because partners, lawyers, they're in a certain bubble of their own, and they see even partners who are very successful, and they are somewhat business people in their own right, because they're overseeing a business or they're recruiting associates and they're getting a piece of their profitability, but they're still workaholics. They're still working bees where they are still doing the billable hour stuff. Maybe they're doing a higher level, but they're still serving their clients who are themselves millionaires, who are themselves owning these businesses, but they're not business owners. These partners are not business owners themselves. And it was very difficult for people that I talked to at the firm to understand, how is it that I'm able to leave, being 38 years old at the time, able to just walk away from this lucrative corporate job that everyone was coveting. This is one of the best law firms in the area. So any lawyer coming out of law school would love to have my spot at this firm. And that was just a shock. And I think they didn't quite understand. They understand now. I explained everything to them. They didn't know all the ins and outs of the business, but that was the second inflection point. And they said, okay, no problem. I'm still affiliated with the firm. They switched my role as off counsel because they said, if you're still going to keep your law license somewhere else or keep it as a solo, why don't you just keep it with us? You can have an office and a secretary, but you're not going to be an employee anymore. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. So that part was awesome and it worked out. But even if they didn't offer me that, I was ready to go at that point.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of reached a point where you realized that so you just got to that point. You got the middle of the pandemic, sounds like mid to late 2020. You just kind of had enough and decided it was time to throw in the towel because the focus just. I remember we talked offline. You had given me a number, and I don't know if you can say it publicly or not, but you had given me a number of hours that you were required to bill out on a yearly basis.
Yep.
Do you remember what that number was, or can you say?
Sure. Yeah. So it's not crazy. Again, I don't know how much the audience knows about what the billable hours are out there generally in the legal world, but so New York City firms, they'll require associates to work 2,200. So 2,200 billable hours for the year, which is a lot. If you really break that down by week, it's a lot.
That's 42 hours. 42 a week.
Yeah, but and I'll explain sort of what goes into this, right? So at my firm, the billable hour requirement is 1,800 hours, right? So if you break that out into a week, it doesn't sound that bad, but first you got to take into account that there's probably another 35% of time in addition to these hours that's not billable. So we're just talking about the hours that get submitted on a bill to a client to pay to the law firm for what was worked. But you've got all kinds of administrative meetings, you've got all kinds of trainings, you've got all kinds of essentially firm related business that's not billed to a client. So even if you're billing 1,800 hours as your minimum, you still need to spend a significant amount of hours in addition to that to kind of be able to run the business, to be able to do the day-to-day things you need to do. And then again, that's just the minimum. And if you're encouraged and expected to exceed your minimum in order to do a good job for the partners and for the clients, but also to get any kind of bonus. So if you want to get a bonus, now you got to get into 1,900, 2,000, 2,100 hours of billable time. And again, as you're adding those hours over and above the minimum, you're also adding the administrative hours that are not billed over and above what those new hours you just added are.
That makes a lot of sense. I see it even in our property management business. I see it because if we have something that we're doing that's billable hourly, And, for every hour that somebody's there, you probably have another third of an hour that somebody back at the office is working on administrative, whether it be estimating or billing or, the accounting side of it, whatever the case may be. For every hour of actual profitable work that you're generating, there is, work behind it that still needs to be done as well. And I think a lot of people forget that when they think about all of the things that go into it, really any business, not even just exclusive to law or real estate or contracting. It's any business. Every hour that a doctor works is not a billable hour. They have to do charting and stuff too, just the same as anybody else would.
Exactly.
So at this point, this is basically like mid 2020 at this point.
Yep.
You're sitting at around 50, 60 doors. You've realized it's time to walk away from the law firm. How did you scale from that 0 to 50 or a 50 door point?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the very first property I bought was using the house hacking strategy. And just to be clear, so everyone knows what that means, basically you would purchase a rental property that has some ability to rent to potential tenants. And you use some part of that property, a fraction of that property for your own living purposes. So at the same time as you're able to generate rent income on that property, you're also able to offset or eliminate your living expenses. So to me, for most average people who are unfamiliar with real estate, first time starting out, maybe thinking about real estate, how can I get into it? House hacking is one of the best ways to go. And the biggest factor of that, which we haven't talked about yet, is that the financing that you can get from banks for house hacking, for owner-occupied properties, is so much more favorable and easier to obtain than non-owner occupied rental property financing. So in my case, I put 10% down, but I certainly didn't have to. Right now, you can get an FHA loan for 3.5% down of 3.5% of the purchase price as your down payment. And you're going to have to probably cover some closing costs, but you can also build those closing costs in to a seller concession where essentially it gets rolled into the loan and the purchase price of the property. So it makes it a lot more affordable for average people to get into real estate investing. And the biggest benefit of a house hack for someone who's brand new, like I was at the time, is if you don't know anything about managing properties, fixing anything, if you don't know a thing about how to do leasing or tenant relations or any of that stuff, it's one of the best ways to practice and to just test the waters if you've never done it. And that was the thing for me. Like, I was an attorney, but I was a green attorney. I was very new, and I had to learn everything from the ground up. And so I read some books, learned some theory, talked to some people, but until you're actually doing it, you're not going to know. And because I was living next to my tenants, and because I also was selective with the location and the type of property I was buying, I had a very positive experience, which allowed me to, use that as a stepping stone to the next deal and the next deal and the next deal. So like the area was good, so it attracted good tenants. The tenants were good, so they were taking care of my property as opposed to trashing it and, doing things that would cause more maintenance and repairs. So I didn't have as many maintenance and repairs. And because they were living next door, they were also on even higher level of, good behavior when it came to being my tenants. So it really was just sort of a very sort of synergistic experience for me. So I thought, okay, I can do this again. I can do this. I can go to the next one. And so I saved up some money for a down payment. I, again, used traditional financing for the next 3 units that I bought. And I went with a non-owner occupied loan for this second purchase. And, if it's not something that's available to you, if you're, as a listener listening to this, you're thinking about getting into real estate, you can do the house hacking strategy over and over again. There are certain limits and certain things you have to navigate when it comes to financing. But if I didn't have enough money, let's say, I think I had saved up 25% for a down payment for the next property over the course of 2 years after I bought the first one. So I think I saved maybe $50,000 altogether, $60,000. I had a pot of money that could cover the down payment and some repair costs and closing costs. So I had enough to do that as a non-owner occupied loan. But even if I didn't have that, I could have gone and found another house hack. And maybe this time I would have gone with an FHA loan and only had put 3.5% down. And I could have scaled that way, at least to a certain degree. I might have been able to buy 3, 4, 5 deals like that over the next 5 to 10 years, which in a lot of cases still sets you up very nicely for options in the future, whether you end up staying at your job, switch a job, whether you do something part-time, because you have that cushion from rental income coming in, you're able to give yourself an opportunity for financial freedom and options. But in my case, I went with non-owner occupied financing. I did that 2 more times. So in the span of, I think, 4 or 5 years, I went from 0 units to 7. And then I started getting into some of the more sophisticated approaches where I started partnering with a business partner as opposed to buying everything myself. I started using an LLC to hold my entity or to hold my properties as opposed to keeping them in my own name. And the biggest thing that allowed me to really scale was to start using private financing and started following the Burr strategy, which was the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat strategy.
I think a couple of things that it's important to mention on those FHA loans, those owner-occupied FHA loans. You can get an FHA loan if you want to do a traditional house hack, the single-family route. You can certainly do that, but FHA I think it's either 4 or 5 units.
4, up to
4
4.
units, up to 4 units on an FHA. Which, when you're looking at a situation like what you're looking at, where you're going to house hack and live in one unit and then rent the other units out, you might as well try to maximize that benefit if you can afford it. And with an FHA putting only 3.5% down, it gives you a lot more wiggle room to try to go out there and find maybe a property that's at a higher value but with a lower down payment, because you're only going in at that 3.5% down. If you can get a couple of extra units under the same roof, that's really the ultimate, is being able to max out an FHA loan with 4 units, 3 of which are cash flowing and 1 of which you're living in, which is basically, at that point, I would hope you're living rent free.
Exactly. Oh yeah, you should definitely be able to live rent free unless you're in a very, very expensive market. If you have a 4-unit property that you're occupying 1 unit and renting out the other 3, definitely.
So at this point, when did you move from the traditional financing, traditional bank route financing, to going into either like private lending or whatever the case may be?
Yeah. So as I was going, and so I got up to 7 units through bank financing. And what I realized about that, as I was kind of looking at my sort of track history at that point and approach, is that it was taking me a really long time. So I think I had an average of about 1.5 years between each purchase of these properties that I was buying. And I wanted to go a little bit faster because, again, still working a ton of hours at the firm, still doing all of that, but already on the track and thinking in my head that I don't really want to continue doing this because it's, the work-life balance was really poor. So I decided and started looking around, talking to people. And, one of the sites I'm sure you're familiar, your audience probably has heard of, is Bigger Pockets.
Of
And
course.
they were talking about the Burr strategy on Bigger Pockets. And I think Brandon Turner, one of the original sort of founders or early on adopters of Bigger Pockets, he's the one that kind of championed that term. And once I started looking into like what's involved with that, you can definitely do the Burr strategy using bank financing, but it's even better and even quicker and even more accelerated if you use private financing, private lenders. And at the same time, I also came across a friend of mine, or we weren't closely related or closely associated at the time, but we started talking at one point, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm in real estate. I have a 6-unit property here in Schenectady, which is one of our local cities here." And I said, "Oh, okay, I have 7 units myself. You want to maybe buy something together?" And so it was 2 things happening at the same time. It was me partnering up with a friend of mine, and at the same time considering this Burr strategy and using private financing to achieve it. And so we kind of put those 2 things together where, a partnership allows you to kind of do more, and your partner can take on things that you can't maybe in the moment or in general because they have different skill sets than you, and you can complement each other. And at the same time, also borrow private financing, private money from private individuals for buying deals more quickly and coming to the table with a cash offer, quote unquote. So just to give for instance, basically the way private financing and the Burr strategy would work is, let's say you're looking at a 5-unit apartment building or 5 combined units. And this was my next deal, which is exactly what we did. And normally you'd have to go to a commercial lender, and it would have to be at least a 20% down type of a deal and type of financing. And, you could go that route. But in our case, what helped a lot is I had befriended and ended up talking to and making a connection with a friend of one of the partners in the law firm who had some money, who was interested in investing that money. And then I had a relative who also was interested in making their money, putting their money to work and making a higher interest rate return than they would get from a savings account or even the stock market. And so we were able to kind of pool that money together and go to the seller and say, hey, we're going to offer you a cash offer. We're going to waive a financing contingency. So property doesn't need to go through an appraisal, and it doesn't need to go through the red tape that would be involved with a bank. And as soon as title comes in, we can close on this property at this price. And the seller was receptive to that. And that enabled us to get a little bit of a discount on the purchase price because, cash financing, cash is king, And so even though it wasn't true cash, it wasn't our cash, it was our private lender's cash. We were able to get that deal under contract, purchase it, and kind of, start the process. And what we did then is we renovated it, we raised the rents, we put in new tenants. And then after a year or so, we went to a commercial lender at that point and we refinanced it at 80%, or I think it was 85% at the time, loan to value, where we were able to pull all of our private lenders' money back out, repay our private lenders, have permanent financing on this building that was at a much lower interest rate and also amortizing as opposed to an interest-only loan, and not have any of our own money invested in it and still have equity and still cash flow. So once
hang on one second, I want to unwrap that real quick, because you were able to, in 1 year's time, you were able to take the building. We'll say it was worth, I'll use Buffalo numbers. We'll say it was worth $100,000.
Yes.
You put money into it, rehabbed it out. We'll say the rehab cost you 50.
Yep.
This building is now worth 200.
Yes.
You were able to refinance it after the first year, pay off your private money guy for his 100 because you were just paying interest on that loan.
Yep.
You were able to pay off all of the rehab costs, the 50,000, and you were able to refinance it at 80% loan to value. So essentially at that point, you were able to pull another, if my math is right, 80% loan to value would be what, 160 on a $200,000? 200 times 0.8. Yeah, 160. So there's an extra 10 grand there, money that you could pull out. And that's tax-free money, by the way, to put back in your pocket to essentially pay you guys back for whatever you had for a down payment on the initial purchase.
Right. And that's exactly right. And the numbers were slightly higher than that on all ends of it, but it was very, very much exactly what happened. And like I said, we didn't have any of our own money invested in the property. We did the rehab with private money. We did the purchase price with private money. And there was a little bit of a cushion over and above what the private money totaled out to be from the proceeds of the commercial loan that we were able to sort of pay ourselves a little bit extra over and above. Knowing, also keeping in mind that the appraised value was even higher, obviously at the 100% of appraised value still gave us a equity cushion in the property. And once this process sort of worked out for us, and once I saw it in practice, not just on Bigger Pockets and hearing about it and kind of theorizing about it, that's when it was like, wow, we can really scale this. We can really take this to another level. And as long as you can find additional or good private money lenders with sufficient cash to lend to you, you can probably do more than one deal at a time, which is what I'm doing now. And that way you can do several deals a year. And, nowadays I'm adding probably 20 to 30 units to my portfolio every single year for the last 3 or 4 years that I've been doing like this type of scaling. And so that was the real reason and the real catalyst for being able to take the portfolio from 7 units in 2015 to it's going to be almost 150 units in the next month or so.
That was the gas on the fire, basically the Burr method and being able to find that private financing.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's what we've done. Yeah.
Nice. So at that point, at the point that you're at now, you're at what did you say, 124 doors? You've got the crosshairs on like 150 by the end of this year, probably by the middle of this year, by the sounds of things. Yes. When you were scaling up, how did you go about finding your deals? Were you pulling them from the MLS? Were people starting to bring deals your way? And I guess the other question I should ask is, what's the average size and number of doors? Do you have a lot of stuff that's onesie twosies, or is it 10, 20, 30 units at a time?
Yeah, so let me take these questions one at a time. So as far as finding deals, so I started out exclusively on the MLS back in 2011, 13, 14, 15. That was all MLS. At that time, it was still possible, and you could still find decent deals on the MLS. The competition wasn't as high because people were still reeling a little bit. Investors were reeling from, the crash of 2009, and things were sort of still a little shaky. Lenders were still a little tight with their lending practices because everyone was still kind of cautious. So there wasn't as much competition, and there were still good deals to be found. The further along we went, and the closer to the present we got, the harder it was to find anything worth buying on the MLS. I would say out of all of my recent properties, I think maybe 2 or 3 from 2017 to the present have been on the MLS.
Wow.
Almost all of the other ones have been off market. And so when it comes to off market, there are a few different ways that we've been able to source deals the ways that they've come to us. So one of them, once we got big enough and once we were had our kind of hands in a lot of different cookie jars, where it's the brokerage, the property management company, the wholesaling business, we knew a lot of people, and we had several different agents on our team. So we had a huge network of people where deals were kind of coming into us. People were calling us, or someone was emailing someone and say, hey, there's this deal. Do you want to check it out? Do you want to check it out? So once we got to scale, it certainly has become more of like a word of mouth type of thing. But originally, it was all the strategies that you hear about on Bigger Pockets. We would drive for dollars. We would pound the pavement. We would check, look for evictions for landlords who are tired, landlords who are looking to get out. And it's all about like reaching out to people and to owners, sellers, potential sellers, and talking to them about, hey, do you want to sell? Is this the right time? Would you sell for the right price? And then it's like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, well, what's the right price? Well, let's talk. Let's look at your building. Let's do a walkthrough and build some rapport with them and get them to like you, and get them, obviously liking you is only going to go so far. You obviously going to have to give them some kind of value that they want to take, some offer that you give them that they don't want to refuse. But those things can happen if you have access to these sellers directly. If you're going through the MLS, you have too many buffers. You're dealing with an agent, maybe there are attorneys involved, all that stuff. Whereas if you're talking to, day to day, if you're talking to regular people about their business, about their rental properties, about what they got going on and why they may be interested in selling, why it might be the right time for them, you might be able to get a better deal, or a deal that otherwise wouldn't be on the MLS because the seller wasn't thinking about putting it on the MLS. And so that has been one of the best ways, those personal interactions, those personal conversations with sellers directly, of obtaining these deals. In terms of size for what we're targeting. So when I started out, I obviously started with a 2-family. I did mix in a single family as part of one of my deals. But from there, I kind of was looking at definitely 3 units or larger, and mostly 4 units or larger. And in terms of how high we've gone, how high we're willing to go, I think, we've gone to 10, 12 units, but we're willing to go now to probably 20, 30. Although we don't necessarily want to go too big and too large with a single, like a single purchase.
I think it's interesting to see, I think everybody reaches a point in their investing business, just like you did, where they realize, all right, I'm up against, because there's only so many mortgages you can put on your credit report and things of that nature. Everybody kind of runs up against that exact same wall that you ran up into. And I think most people have to get creative at that point. Some people just do the portfolio loan, put everything under one big blanket loan and clear off my credit. And other people go the Burr route with private financing like you did. And there's a lot of different ways to grow and scale in real estate. It's just about finding the method that works best for you, your investment strategy, the lifestyle that you want to build, things of that nature. And I think it's interesting to see how different people decide to scale their businesses. And talking about scaling a little bit here, kind of shifting away from the real estate investing, because you're not just a real estate investor. We've only talked about 2 of your hats so far.
Right.
Obviously, you're an attorney.
Yep.
You're a real estate investor. You also own a real estate brokerage, a property management company. Where did those kind of factor in? When did that come into the picture? Maybe a few minutes on that, not a real in-depth thing. We could literally go for 2 or 3 more 2 or 3 more interviews just on that stuff, I
I
think.
know.
But where did
Yeah.
that come from all of a sudden?
Yeah, there's definitely a ton there. Well, so definitely property management was more of, you know, kind of an offshoot of the other stuff. Because once you get to this scale, you can't do it yourself. That's one of the things that I think is important to emphasize to people, that you can't be a one-man show or one-woman show no matter what. If you get beyond maybe 3 or 4 properties, it just becomes impossible. Your quality of life is going to suffer. You're going to be in the same position you were, if I'm talking about quality of life at a law firm, yeah, well, now you're just doing the same thing, except you're running ragged, doing everything for all of your rental properties, even though you don't even have that many. You need to be able to leverage and outsource the work. So for us, it meant that we had to have a maintenance crew. We had to have leasing agents that will actually do the apartment leasing. We had to have contractors for when we're doing our rehabs for the Burr strategy. All that stuff kind of lends itself to, okay, well, now that we figured this out for ourselves, we can offer this service on a limited scale to others in our area. And because we had the brokerage going at the same time, we were able to, if a deal doesn't make sense for us to buy, what else can we do with it? Oh, we can give it to one of our agents to list, or maybe we're going to go the wholesaling route and, get it under contract because one of our agents has a buyer, or we have a buyer that will pay a higher price than what we're willing to pay. And so that allows you to make money in multiple different ways. So it's all about having multiple streams of income and ability to, not to be morbid, skin a cat in multiple different
Right,
ways.
right.
You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
as long as you have a lot of options, the more options you have, the easier your business is going to thrive and the easier it will be for you to make money. So that was the reason why we have the brokerage and why we have the property management company. And now they're all on their own, very much legitimate standalones. Like they could certainly stand alone and provide sufficient income, for whatever you want to do, even potentially for financial freedom, just on those merits alone.
Mhm. That's interesting because we were talking a little bit. I don't remember if we were online or offline, but we were talking about like property management companies, that, for instance, being a platform for other jump offs. Like you had
Yes.
said, here in New York, I think you probably set it up the correct way. You're an attorney, you would know this, but you have to have a licensed broker, or you have to be a licensed broker or a licensed agent operating under a licensed brokerage in order to manage property for someone else. So I'm
Correct.
assuming it was probably the brokerage first, followed by the property
Yes.
management company. And then from there, the property management company, now you've got a contracting arm. Now I've got a cleaning company. Now I've got a landscaping company or whatever. It's very easy once you start seeing that financial success in one area of your life to start applying those same methods to other areas of your life. And really, real estate is one of those things, again, especially in the property management industries, where I don't know a single real estate agent that doesn't have a need for all of the services that we've talked about: property management, contracting, landscaping, blah, 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 blah. The more of those hats that you can wear, or the more of those businesses that you can not necessarily operate, but at least be the owner of and have good quality people to operate, it just makes it that much easier for you to insource as many things as possible, I would think.
Absolutely. I agree. And that's what it's all about. You're synergizing what you're doing.
Hmm.
So as long as what you're doing, if you're involved in multiple ventures, as long as they're all kind of in the same general niche and the same general kind of direction, and they're moving in the same direction, I think it's worthwhile, as long as you can handle it all, to pursue them, because they will complement each other along the way.
Hmm. Well, and that kind of leads me into my next question, which is, who are the top 5 people in your Rolodex? And I think that this is an interesting one for you specifically because when you think about the real estate team that everybody talks about, it's your real estate agent, your attorney, your contractor, your home inspector, your banker, and you have some of those hats. You already wear some of those hats. Like, I don't
Right.
know if you do your own real estate closings or not. I would assume that they probably at least run them through the firm that your license hangs with. You have a brokerage. You have a property management company. I don't think you have a contracting company. Maybe you have a few maintenance guys in house or something like that. But
Hmm. Yeah.
when you already have some of these things in place internally, who are the 5 people, or the 3 people, or the 2 people who are at the top of your Rolodex, if you will?
Yeah. So I think the answer might surprise you a little bit. So I think it's actually important to have a separation between your role in a business as a business owner and some of the hats that you might also wear and have. So I am an attorney, and I could do our own closings, and I could do our own evictions and any other sort of outward facing legal work, but I
Hmm.
don't. And one of the main reasons I don't, well, one reason is I'm busy as it is, and I don't need to do the billable hourly work that I just left my law
Right.
firm and didn't want to continue doing. But the other reason is that you don't have the clarity of perspective. So when we're dealing with a potential large deal, multifamily apartment complex, and they're moving parts, and my business partner and I love the building. We think that there's a ton of potential. We just walk through it, and we're very much invested in wanting to buy it, right? And then we do an inspection on it, and something comes back, like maybe there's a ton of asbestos in the basement, let's say, right?
Hmm.
The human nature and the tendency is to just say, let's just gloss over it. Like we'll push through it. We'll sort of skip and cut corners with not wanting to negotiate or not wanting to. We still love the building, so we'll deal with it ourselves. We don't want to put it on the
Right.
seller to do something about it, if you know what I'm saying. We
Hmm.
don't want we're just going to go with it because we are so invested. Maybe we put a down payment down. Maybe we spent money on an inspection, right? We paid an
Hmm.
inspector to do an inspection, and now we're vested. We have a vested interest in it. You're
Maybe
not
this is the first good deal you've seen in 6 months. Like,
correct. Exactly.
stuff like that happens too. When the market is slow, sometimes any deal looks like a good deal.
Exactly. And when that happens, you're not thinking clearly, and
Hmm.
you're not doing yourself and your own business a service by being in that position if you're also the supposed to be the independent advisor. So that's why when we do our deals, there's a couple of attorneys that are in my, so to speak, virtual Rolodex that we work every single time with, and they're the ones that do everything A to Z when it comes to closing a rental property deal, and also negotiating with the other attorney and doing all that stuff. So I think it's important. I think separation is important regardless of what your expertise might be. Now, because I have that expertise, I have the sort of the inside knowledge and the inside track of how it should go and what I can say, what we can and can't do. So I have that sort of knowledge, but I'm still going to another second pair of eyes to kind of give me that sort of clarity that I'm lacking. So in terms of people, one, yes, attorneys, and actually several of them. Two, uh, definitely, contractors are extremely important. We do have them quote unquote in house. So we have contractors that work for us all the time, but I would still put them on that list. Like if you're trying to build a list for yourself and you're trying to see, okay, who do I need on my team? You definitely need a contractor, or at least you need more than one. You actually need a few different contractors. I
A
think there's
general and some specialists. Yeah.
exactly a distinction needs to be made, especially for rental property owners, between a maintenance worker, someone who can handle the day-to-day maintenance, and a contractor or a contractor crew that can do your rehabs and turnovers and actually upgrades to apartments and buildings. So one is maintenance, one is upgrades. And we have both, and we have several of each because of the scale that we're in. Definitely insurance broker. It's extremely important to have really good insurance. I own all my real estate in separate LLCs. LLCs are good. I'm all for separating and kind of having the liability separation, but there's still no substitute for having really good insurance. So you need to have a good insurance broker. We have two of them. Again, because of the scale, we go to this one. He'll give us a price. We'll go to that one. He'll give us a price. Sometimes we'll go with one guy. Sometimes we'll go with the other one. And then in addition to the ones that I've already mentioned, I think you need a real estate agent to source deals for you and to help you find deals, especially if they're plugged into the market and they're the type of agent that has the investor mindset, and hopefully they're an investor themselves. So in our case,
Hmm.
yes, that's all in house because we have a team of agents like that. And, obviously we're real estate brokers ourselves, but I think it's extremely important to have that person in your Rolodex and be able to talk to them and bounce ideas off of them, and also possibly find you really good deals. Quick plug, my brokerage is called Serenity Real Estate Team. We're out of Albany, New York. If you guys are looking in Albany, if anyone's listening, watching, and you want to try to buy something in or around the capital region, maybe Andrew can share my information and we put it in the description of this video, or
Absolutely.
the comments, and you guys can reach out. And then the final person on the list that I would say you want to have is a banker or a mortgage broker. And again, we have several. We work with a lot of different banks and credit unions and commercial mortgage departments. But you need to have an in and a line to them that can help you, if you're doing the Burr strategy, to help you get the refinances done and get the maximum out of your properties that you need to get. Or if you're not going with the with the Burr with private money, but you want to use bank financing, you need to have someone like that as well. So those are my 5, and I would definitely say that's what everyone should be aspiring to have.
I think that's a pretty good list. I mean, it's pretty standard. It's the same list that we talk about pretty much anytime you talk about having, who's your real estate dream team. But I think that you hit on a couple of really important points there, and that's having multiples in the same position. When you're talking about insurance, it's good to get quotes from multiple places. When you're talking about real estate agents, it's good to be working with more than one agent because everybody has different networks. What this guy finds, this lady may not find, and vice versa. There's a lot of different agents out there with different networks and different levels of expertise. And I think that it's important to mention that if you are going to work with an agent, they need to understand the investment world. It can't be somebody that only does single family residential where they're more concerned with the color of the paint and where how the curtains
Exactly.
look than
Exactly.
how old the boiler is and whether this thing has a roof on it or not. So that's something that's worth noting as well. I want to kind of change paths here a little bit. We've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit more on the abstract topics, if you will.
Sure.
Starting with this question, and I think this is an interesting one because I think I have an idea of where you're going to go with it. I'm not sure, but I think I have a pretty good idea. What is something that you think is going to blindside landlords in the next 12 months? Or what is something that you see new investors get blindsided by on a regular basis that could easily be avoided?
Yeah. So with regard to landlords in the next 12 months, I think the regulation, that's one of the biggest sort of looming clouds over the landlord and real estate rental property industry in America. I think it's probably more so a concern in some states like ours, like New York, California, and a few other states than others. But as you and I spoke on my podcast last week, the Biden administration is currently pushing a tenants bill of rights, and they essentially gave a mandate to several key federal agencies to investigate and come up with restrictions, as I would refer to them, on the real estate industry. And it's definitely something that all landlords need to be aware of and need to stay up on and sort of understand and prepare for and pivot if necessary. We don't have anything concrete right now. Nothing's been sort of decided. Nothing's official. Nothing is a law, which you have to comply with right now. But it's certainly something that has been brewing and on the horizon. And as you know, since the pandemic, we've had, across the country, there have been many eviction moratoria and also rental assistance programs, which also double as eviction moratoriums for those that apply, for tenants that apply. They can't be evicted in many cases. So that's still going on in New York. The rental assistance issue is still occurring, is still ongoing. Our governors have continued to revive it and continued to keep that in place. So that is still an issue for a lot of landlords. But globally, or sort of nationally, I think it's definitely sort of what's going to be the federal policy on this. Is the federal government, through various agencies, planning to get into regulating rental properties and real estate industry, which they really haven't done up until now? I haven't talked about it, but the headwinds are there. It has definitely been several years coming. The voices on the advocacy side are definitely getting louder for various tenant advocacy groups. So I definitely see that as a potential concern in the near future.
It's interesting that you brought specifically some of the COVID restrictions up. I have a press release that I had pulled up from a couple days ago. I'm not sure if you had seen that there's a representative out of Georgia that's pushing back against he reintroduced the Respect State Housing Laws Act, which is essentially them trying to get some repeal on the COVID restrictions with regards to like the 30-day notices and things of that nature. So we are starting to see some pushback on the Biden tenant bill of rights that has been, and again, like you said, it's just a document that's been published and that's as far as it's gone. It's not law or anything of that nature, but you can kind of see the writing on the wall, and you can see that there's going to be more and more legislation coming down the pipeline that's going to have an impact on how housing providers run their businesses going forward. Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's just the sort of the name of the game, unfortunately. And in terms of affecting change, if you're a rental property owner, I think the best thing you can do, what's in your power, is to certainly, speak up, and also use your voting power when it comes to
Hmm.
selecting officials that are in charge. So I think
Hmm.
that's important. I think the sort of the grassroots organizations on the other side are very vocal and very forceful with their agenda and pushing that. And I think the, landlords and rental property owners and investors need to do the same.
Well, and I think you're right. I think that a lot of investors buy one or two properties and don't really stay up on the laws until it's time to go to lease an apartment another time or something like that.
Yep.
And it's tough to stay up to date on the laws because this stuff
Exactly.
shifts very, very rapidly. I mean, we talk about HSTPA here in New York, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act from 2019. They basically passed that on a Friday and said, all right, well, all of this goes into effect immediately, so deal with it. And
Yep.
it was a 75-page piece of legislation that you had to sift through and figure out, okay, I closed my business on Friday at 5 p.m. I reopened the doors Monday at 9 a.m. How do I have to operate between then and now? What's changed? So
Exactly.
I think it's definitely relevant for every landlord and every housing provider to stay current on what the laws are in their area.
Exactly.
How do you see the role of the landlord changing over the course of the next decade?
So I think with that, I mean, I think it does relate back to what we just talked about a little bit. There are a few other things that I can think of, but obviously the regulatory landscape and the legal landscape is going to play a major role. It just depends on which way the sort of the politics of it are going to go, whether it's going to sort of shift back and swing back like a pendulum, or if it's going to continue kind of moving toward this, restrictive approach. So I think no one has a crystal ball, so I can't say obviously, but I think that we're probably going to see more restrictions statewide and nationwide. And then in general, the other big trend I think that's important to keep an eye on is definitely technology. I
Hmm.
think that, with the rise of artificial intelligence and use of it in various aspects of industries and, the kind of the online world and the video and the spoken word world, I think it's something to watch for because it's gonna, we're gonna continue evolving and developing new technologies that I think are gonna start disrupting or, supplementing or assisting the real estate industry. I don't know exactly where it's gonna lead, but we're not. I think if we're talking about automating buying and selling process, right? I think
Hmm.
that's gonna be harder. With regard to like the iBuyers, I know it's something that you mentioned to me offline that what do I think about that? Is there going to be is there a concern that they can take over and eliminate real estate agents and maybe make it a very transactional experience where you can just go online and see a house, click a button, boom, I'm the owner of that house, very similar to buying a stock or something like that.
Hmm.
I don't think that that is very likely, at least for a while, at least until the artificial intelligence technology really catches up and is able to provide that kind of a unique overview and review of what the asset is, but specifically because each property is unique. Even if it was the same builder using the same blueprints, building a house next door to another house, there's still going to
Hmm.
be two unique pieces of land and parcels and properties. And for that reason, I don't ever see it being as easy to buy real estate and sell real estate as it is to buy stocks or buy any other commodity electronically where you can just do it online. I think you're going to need personal interactions because especially we're just talking about residential real estate where people are going to be using that real estate to live in. I don't see it ever being that transactional. I think that human touch will always need to be there and we're a long way away based on the housing stock that we have, the owner demographics that we have. We have a lot of older owners, but we also have owners, in their 40s and 50s that are kind of, they're staying put. They're
Hmm.
sitting on their rental properties. They're happy with how things are going. So I don't see it shifting that dramatically, at least for another 20, 30 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about AI specifically. I think that there's a large market for AI in an area that nobody, I don't think, has thought about yet, and that's maintenance.
Mm,
If you can put somebody into an AI chat script or an AI phone system or something like that that can walk you through, I need to troubleshoot. I have
mm,
a breaker that needs to be reset. Okay,
yes.
well, we're going to walk you through this using AI, how to reset a breaker, or okay, we're going to get you to a certain stage and then refer you to a YouTube video or
Right.
get you to a certain stage. And did that resolve the problem? No. Okay, we're going to connect you with a live human.
Yep.
Um, I think that that's something that would be achievable on a large scale. And I think that that's something that, I mean, pretty much every property management company would be interested in, at least, because if you can eliminate one service call for a non-issue in a month, like that's money saved right off the bat.
Huge.
And the more
Agreed.
times you can do that, the more maintenance calls you can reduce by somebody being able to turn a breaker off and back on again themselves versus sending out a maintenance technician. That
Yeah.
could actually be very cost effective in the long run.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I think that that's something I hope for myself, for no other reason than for myself. I hope that that's something that happens. Maybe I should be the one to create it. I don't know, but
You might want to. Yeah, no, I think it will. I
I just
think
gave away a multi-million-dollar idea on
there you
the
go.
RentPrep show.
That's right. Exactly.
All right, I do have one more question for you here. We're getting close to the end, but what is one of the biggest curveballs that you've faced thus far in any part of your career, whether it be law or real estate investing or starting a brokerage, starting a management company? And did you hit it out of the ballpark or did you strike out?
So I guess I'll sort of go back to the close to the beginning. I did have a pretty big curveball. This is when I was brand new investor. I was very green. And this was the very next deal after the duplex that I talked about earlier. I went into it. It's in a kind of a C plus, C minus type of an area in my local area here. So it's not the nicest area. The tenant base isn't the greatest. And the property itself, it was a 2-family and a single family kind of on 2 lots adjacent to each other. And I was so gung-ho because I was coming off of this really positive experience with this duplex that I'm definitely doing this. And this is right after, get into this bonus situation. Like, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make sure that I'm not beholden to someone else. So I'm really gung-ho about buying a new property. And so this property is on the MLS. It sat there for a while. They've reduced the price a bunch. And I came in, I represented myself. Again, I didn't have an agent on my side for that deal. I thought I knew enough already, negotiated the deal myself. I bought it for a very reasonable price. It's a 3-unit, basically 3 units for $107,000. And I also even got a 2.5% commission to myself because, it was on the MLS.
Nice.
It was awesome. Right. So I'm in it for like 105, something like that, whatever it was, 104. And then I get into the property and, people, I did an inspection return before I purchased the property. Inspection return a bunch of issues. And I was just saying, no. I'll handle it. I got a, nice amount of money set aside for renovations. This is going to be great. So I get into this deal and there's an up and down 2-family. The first floor tenant left before I bought it, which was great. So I can start the renovations there. And then the 2 tenants one tenant upstairs and 1 tenant in a single family house out back are still in the units and paying me rent. So awesome. That's great. And I get into the renovations and I have a buddy of mine. He's got a couple of construction guys. They start taking down, doing demo. And they're like, dude, the joists are rotted, like literally like crumbling on themselves, like just powder post beetles apparently got into them and they're just falling. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Well, what do we have to do? Well, you gotta, run all new joists here. Okay. Then they get into, this beam right here, this one of 2 main beams in the property, that's also rotted out. You're going to need to figure something out. So I get a foundation company to come in. They quote me like $8,000, $8,500. All right, go ahead, do that. Then
that's not bad, actually.
Something else happens. The furnaces are extremely old and they need to be, replaced or whatever. And the whole ducting needs to be done. Okay. Then we have roof leaks upstairs. So I'm like, okay, I got that. Then we've got, these windows are really shoddy and leaking. You need to fix that. And like one thing after the other with these properties. And same thing happens. And the property next door, the single family house that came with this, she's having issues there. So I'm just spending money left and right as I'm doing this, and I'm spending my own time over there. I'm doing some of the painting. I'm helping the contractor guys and everything. We get everything done. I get it rented. Everything's good, and I think it was like middle of the winter. I get a call. Hey, the furnaces aren't working, and the hot water tanks. We don't have hot water. I'm like, what the hell is going on? I go and look. The property would flood.
Yeah.
Every time there are serious strong rains or snow melts, like it was really warm weather at that point, and there's like maybe a foot of water in this basement, and it flooded out. And kind of, anytime it floods a boiler or a hot water tank or a furnace, you can't use it until you get the water out and dry everything out. So
Right.
I'm going back and forth. I started calling myself Superman at that point, because I go into work as Clark Kent wearing my suit, right? And then when I needed to go over to this property to deal with these issues, I'd have to change into like overalls, or I change into like some dirty clothes and boots to get into like this crappy basement to fix these issues, or meet contractors to fix these issues. And I used to do that back and forth, back and forth. And, at that point, with that type of experience that I was having, I think most people would probably just say, what the hell am I doing? Like,
Right.
I'm a lawyer. I'm highly paid. I got a great career. Why am I doing this? Why am I going out of my way to go to this shitty house to go deal with this issue over here, where I could just wash my hands of it, do my thing, white collar, tie, chill? And I didn't, because of what I said in the beginning, because I had a mission, I had a goal, and I had an objective. And I said to myself, I don't care what happens with this property. I don't care what I need to do. I'm going to do it to make sure that I don't fail and to make sure that I reach my goal. And so, long story short, we were able to overcome the actual maintenance or contracting issue. I was able to do that. I was creative enough when I bought the building that I bought the two buildings on two different lots. So I split the price. So even though it was a total of $105,000, I paid $1,000 for the single family, and I paid the remainder, financed the remainder with the bank. So I had the single family property free and clear. So I was smart enough to do that ahead of time. And then I was able to do some refinancing, get all my money back out still of this property after I did all the renovations, and essentially did a Burr out of it. And was able to pay off some of my student loans with the proceeds from the loan. And then a few years later, I sold the two family for another probably $30,000 or $40,000 profit. And so the only thing I have remaining is that single family, which has been kind of self-running itself, with the tenant taking care of everything since then. So I took a negative, which could have been a very much a negative, a career-ending negative, where most people probably would just quit and given up and said, nah, you know what, too much work, too much hardship, I don't need this, and would have walked away. And I said, no, I'm not going to let that happen. And I kept going, and it worked out.
Well, and I think it's important to note that you're exactly right when you say that is probably, like, for most people, if they're getting into real estate investing and this is the first thing that happens to them, second thing that happens to them, they're gone. They're getting right out of this industry. And most people don't understand that all of the success that you want is just on the other side of your comfort zone. And when you're dealing with situations like, I mean, you don't know the inside of a furnace, you're an attorney.
Right.
Like, it's not like you're basically standing there waiting for somebody to show up, but you pushed through, you persevered, you had the gumption to keep moving forward every single day. Got to get up, got to get out of bed, got to keep pushing forward. And that's what makes us successful as investors and as entrepreneurs, is that drive. And I think that's something that's key for everybody out there to remember, is especially when you're getting kicked, when you're down, that's when you really have to stand up and push through. And I think that's literally the reason that you're at 120 something doors with 150 in the crosshairs today.
Agreed. Yes.
So now that we know that you have 150 in the crosshairs, what's next for you? What hat are you putting on next?
Yeah. So for me, as we've talked offline, it's not about scaling infinitely. I don't want to do that. It's definitely not 1,000 units. I'm not trying to be Grant Cardone or anything like that. I think that, I'm reaching the comfort level of where I want to be. I am a very driven person, so I do kind of take on challenges, and I like new challenges all the time. So my next thing, my new thing is, once all this, my businesses are stable and kind of can run themselves, I would really, and I'm pushing for it now, is getting into more of the education space. And I want to give back to people that, maybe are starting out, maybe are earlier on in their journeys than I am currently, and show them and tell them what my experiences were and how did I do this, and what to do and what not to do, and try to learn from the mistakes that I made along the way, and not make those same mistakes and go further and faster than I did. And so I have a YouTube channel where it's called Succeed REI. You guys can find it right on YouTube. You can just type that in, where I basically share my experience. I talk about various real estate investing strategies, various different aspects of the real estate industry, whether it's from a legal perspective or just an investor perspective. So, if anyone's interested, listening, watching this, check that out. But that's my next thing, definitely, to kind of stabilize what I've got going on in terms of my investments, and also get in and give back to others who are coming up in the real estate industry.
No, and it's well done. Like your entire YouTube channel is very well done. Your video quality is very, very high. The topics that you cover are always relevant. It's a good channel. I'm a
Thanks, Andrew.
subscriber. I recommend that anybody who's listening hops on and subscribes as well. I believe it's youtube.com/successrei.
Succeed
Succeed REI.
REI. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we'll definitely make sure that gets included in the video comments as well. Thank you so much for coming out and being on the show today. It's been an excellent interview. It's interesting to pick the brain of somebody who's done so much in such a small span of time. Other than the YouTube channel, where could people find you?
They can also find me on Instagram. You can find me there, succeed_REI, and Facebook, same thing. Try to keep it consistent all across all different platforms. And then also my brokerage. So it's Serenity Real Estate 518.com, which is the website for our real estate brokerage. You guys can find me there if you have any interest or are looking to possibly invest in the Albany region in New York. Feel free to reach out to me there. And and happy to help in any way that I can.
Awesome. I appreciate that so much. Well, we are pretty much here at the end of the show. I do want to put a little disclaimer here at the end, since obviously we have been speaking with an attorney. It's worth mentioning that anything you heard in today's episode is not legal advice. Please speak with the people in your team. Speak with the people that understand your unique situation, whether it be your attorney, your financial advisor, your real estate broker, your property manager, whoever it is that you need to speak to. Speak to your local trusted team that understands your unique situation before you listen to anything that a couple of guys on a video said. Again, Vitaliy, thank you so much for being with me today. Anything else that you want to mention on the way out?
No, Andrew, thanks so much. I just appreciate it. And I love the RentPrep community, and hopefully we can stay in touch.
Oh, you know what? We should probably mention, we mentioned briefly earlier, I was actually on your podcast as well. That video, I don't believe is live yet as we're recording, but probably will be live by the time this goes up.
Yes.
So
yes,
I would say, I would say sometime within the next couple of weeks, maybe.
Yes.
And that'll be on your YouTube page, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks again, Andrew. I appreciate it.